thank you for coming today. Appreciate it. Hope this is going to be entertaining. This presentation is going to be pretty high level, right, about strategy, right? So as we just heard, things are early. It's early for compliance. It's early for regulation. And it's still very early for, what the right approach is going to be for managing, anything related to data compliance when you create LLMs or anything adjacent to it. So, right, I think it's the right time to step back and sort of think, well, like if we're going to develop LLMs at scale, right? If we're really going to start developing, not just one or two, but have teams, 50 teams, 100 teams, each of them building on top of Gen AI models, right? What do we think is really going to happen with the data management, with the compliance types of stuff? And what can we do now to prepare us for this inevitable headache, right? So let's be clear, it's going to be a headache, right? Anytime a new computing platform comes along, it's been a headache, right? So we can go through examples here, and we're already seeing some headaches here, right, in the headlines, right? So, right, specific things that are unique and emergent with LLMs, right, are just some things listed here. Very small, undetectable bugs that lead to a very high blast radius. Legal and compliance issues, right? Very high amounts of liability, need clarity on who's actually liable for what when multiple parties are involved, right? And just the general, how do we develop quickly without having to have a meeting every week about, are we following the rules? Are we doing the right thing, right? These are things that are in our way as AI developers. And if we don't sort of just step back and think about, well, what can we do today to prevent us from getting sidelined later, right? We think that that's the right activity. That's where we should be investing, time in today, right? So I'll make the case that AI development is very different than traditional development. That's okay. This has happened several times over the last couple of decades. Web 2.0, all of this, every time a new computing paradigm has come along, right, we've had to adapt, right? And my thesis here is that every time we've needed to adapt, there's been an attempt to lock things down, right? We thought that that was the right thing to do. So let's go back to Web 2.0. Imagine it's 1998. Imagine, oh my gosh, we're going to release software how many times? We're going to release once a month? That's crazy, right? We can't, how could we possibly release software once a month, right? This sounds like nuts. What about the compliance? What about the rules? What about all of these things that we need to follow, right? I remember doing this. I worked for a big box retailer. The solution was, what we need to do? We need to fill out a paper form and we need to fax it. And then we need to get a sign off from a VP. And that's how we're going to do a release. Yep. And then what happened after that, right? What happened after that was, well, actually, this is a pain in the neck. We can't release software with these encumbrances. This is too much. So what we need? We need to OCR these forms. That's what we should be buying. We should totally digitize these forms and we can just process signature forms at scale. That sounds like a great idea, right? Was it a great idea? No, right? It was not a great idea. That's not what happened. That's not the world we live in today, where we can do thousands of releases per week, small ones, albeit, right, with pipelines, right? It's just not what happened. And it's never been what happened every time a new compute paradigm comes along. So I always think that it's, hey, if that's what happened with Web 2.0, and then we had cloud, right? We had the cloud revolution, and we said, all right, we need to make very small incremental updates, and we need something like, what we've landed on is not, hey, what we need to do? We need to do security reviews once a day, right? That was a knee-jerk reaction, and said, how are we going to make so many releases, right, without enough compliance and reviews in place, right? And in the beginning, it was, hey, we just need to do more reviews. We need to do more compliance reviews. We need to embed security professionals within your team, and they need to look at stuff once a day, right? Again, is that the world we live in today? No, it's not, right? We've automated those things, and we've built those into our development pipelines, right? Which required a fundamentally different approach to releasing software, right? In that case, it was pipelines. It was CI/CD pipelines, and we moved on with ourselves, and now we live in a world where we can release. As developers, we can release, right? So I'd make the case that for AI development, right, we have yet another problem here. A very simplified version of it is that you have more moving pieces than we previously had, right? In addition to the actual software, the LLM, we have the training data, we have possibly RAG data, right? We might have other data that we need to power these applications. We have context, we have the configuration, and there's probably a few other sources, each of which are living currently in little silos typically, right? So one person might own some of this, one person might own some of this. You might have to ask somebody for this training set. This does not look like normal software development, right? What that means is we can expect we're going to need to change how we do, software development again. The world just gets a lot more complicated. The development landscape gets more complicated. Okay, so, right, so I'm here representing, our product. I'm the CTO for Prove AI, right? This is our philosophy. It's designed to help organizations de-risk AI, simplify compliance, and unify governance, right? So the idea is, A, we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen with compliance, right? But what we can be sure of now is that it's going to be, what the thing that you can do now is get your data stored in the right place in a way that will set you up for success with later, and most importantly, not get in the way of your development teams, right? That's something you can act on today. That really, you're not wasting anything. You're going to have to do this anyway. You're going to have to store your observability data somewhere, your compliance data somewhere. Why not think this through now about the use cases of the future? Get this data written to the right type of place, get your event streams written to the right place so you don't have to waste time later redoing everything, right? And that is what our product provides. We are in early access, as you can imagine, right? This is an emergent type of use case. We're not embarrassed by that, right? It's early, that's fine, right? We just think that it's worth the investment now to do that. We do use a decentralized ledger as the source of record behind, right? So what is this magic data store I'm talking about? For Prove AI, it's a decentralized ledger. There's a number of reasons we think that there's a very legitimate set of use cases, right, that are very well suited towards a distributed ledger as your data store for these types of compliance related events. Even if it's not the actual compliance data, it might be hashes of that data. Something that allows you to prove authenticity, have it be tamper-proof, and allow you to do all of these use cases, which I'll go through right now, that we expect to be important in the future. All right, so now, right, again, what I promised today was we'll go through a few forward-looking use cases. These are food for thought. These are like, yeah, will you have to do this organization? We think so. I think so. And say, if I'm really going to need to solve these types of problems, then, maybe adopting something that's ledger-based is actually a good idea. So I'll go through a few sort of tenets or use cases that we think are going to be important, right? So one is this notion of being always compliant and observable for AI and any sort of Gen AI sort of activity here, right? Collect everything, observe everything, right? Put it in one place. Most important to this use case is, let's assume that we're not going to only have one MLOps tool. Let's assume you're going to do AI development at scale. You're going to have 50 teams, even 10 teams. They're probably not going to want to use all of the same tooling, just like history has told us, right? So we're all going to standardize on web application container X. No, has that ever happened? It's never happened, right? So should we expect it to happen with AI development? No, we shouldn't. So we can prepare for this inevitability now, and then we say, okay, if we expect our teams to use the tools that they want to use to be successful, we can therefore assume that there's probably going to be multiple MLOps tools in the mix, right? Let's also assume now we need to be always compliant, right? So this is not a notion of quarterly review is good enough, weekly review is good enough. Things are going to change so quickly, and each little change may have a big impact on whatever happens compliance-wise. So I should basically react to that by saying, my goal as a business, as a CTO, as a CIO, is I want to be always compliant. I want to basically say, everything that's logged is already logged. It's transparent. I don't need to make a phone call. I don't need to upload artifacts because that's going to be too slow, right? I don't have time every time somebody wants to push a new model version to go upload a bunch of artifacts that proves that I'm doing the right thing with my data, right? And again, you don't have to wait for compliance to move on this, right? As technology professionals, our job is to do the right thing, right? It's not to comply with the law. It's to do the right thing, right? Do the right thing for our customers, do the right thing for, our business. So Right? There's no reason to wait for compliance in this case, right? It's the right thing to do is to say, yeah, this is going to be too slow. Why don't I get everything written to a place that's transparent, observable, and provably correct, right? Provably accurate, such I don't have to field requests for information. I don't have to upload stuff, and I don't have to keep being bombarded with additional, requests for stuff. Okay, so observable and compliant, I think, are the two coins that we're talking about here. But the idea is right. The game is not going to be about, right, looking at stuff once a month and having a review. It's going to be about it being available and online at all times and completely hands off, right? So you as a technology professional, you don't want to get involved, right? Somebody says, "Are you guys compliant, or are you guys doing the right thing with model bias and drift?" You're going to say, I show my work. I put all of our work here. It's observable. If you want to go look at it, this is why we make all of our information available, maybe internally, maybe externally. It doesn't matter. The point is it shouldn't fall on additional work for us as technologists. All right, so I like to just talk about a very real use case here. So a use case could be, let's say I'm a heavy equipment manufacturer. Like, let's say I make some sort of robotic devices, right, that do some sort of industrial application, right? And let's say that these devices have embedded firmware now that have some sort of AI model, built into it. Typical, like you can imagine all sorts of X-ray machines with Gen AI models at this point. They're not a far-fetched use case. Industrial is something we've seen, interest in. What happens now, though? Let's say you have like a product line of 50 different teams now trying to build AI into their products. And let's say that now the maintenance requirements on these things change in reaction to your exact models. All right, as a developer, I'm not going to have time to update my maintenance procedures every time I deploy tweaks to the model. I'm not going to have time to go through a compliance and safety review. Right. The idea here is that I just want to automate all of this. Every time I make a change, possibly with like an AI co-pilot of sorts, right? I would like to have an AI maybe just generate documentation and maintenance, right, stuff for me. If that's the vision of what I want to do, well, then this, what happens when your automated documentation says something terribly wrong about, a maintenance procedure, right? Massive liability, massive risk of public safety. How do you get around this, right, without having to have really deep reviews every time you make a single change, right? We can't live in that world. So what you can do, though, right, in this case, is just get into the notion of, look, I show my work. We're just going to keep developing. We're going to keep incrementally updating stuff. I need a way to share this information with third parties, my customers, about exactly what have I done to these models. What exactly is the impact? So collectively, we can make a decision about where liability sits with these sort of automated, maintenance stuff, right? And have a very clear sense of roles and responsibilities to avoid safety issues and legal issues. So, it's lots of complicated things here. So next, I wanted to talk about use cases, secure third-party verifiability. So when we talk about this, right, we say compliance and safety, right? We typically talk about it as internal, right? But now let's think about the use case where, I'm a software vendor today, and I want to see your SOC 2 compliance, right? Very typical type of thing. Maybe I develop software in the Web 2.0 world. I want to go and embed a vendor's piece of software into my solution. Typical thing to do, show me your compliance. I want to see your certificates because I can only do business with other organizations that have high quality, high degree of compliance. Right, normal. Okay, now what happens in the LLM world, right? What happens when I'm trying to license LLMs? What happens when I'm trying to share this type of information with third parties when there's noticeably more moving parts? It gets more complicated, right? Again, the show your work aspect here is probably the best solution, right? Instead of me saying, I'll give you a certificate and we'll do an audit yearly, it's probably going to be, I'm just going to give you an event stream. I'm going to write an event stream of what we do, who did it, and how it happens, right? I'm going to show that I'm always compliant, right? And I'm going to share this information in a secure way with you that doesn't require us to even have a phone call or an email exchange, right? So if you believe that that's sort of the, personally, we believe that that's sort of the inevitable, way that this nets out. And in this case, writing this type of information to a decentralized ledger makes a whole lot of sense. Example could be in healthcare, right? So let's say I have let's say I buy a provider of medical chatbots that provide some sort of medical advice to patients, and you can imagine there's all sorts of liability issues there. So let's say I say, hey, I expect you as an LLM provider, as a chatbot provider, to be continually updating and improving the quality of your service. On the other hand, right, we can't have a 2-month gap where you fell out of compliance of something, right, and I was unaware of it and you were unaware of it, right? We want a record, a tamper-proof record, a place to point to where we can say, you've told everything you've done with your model since we did our initial review is written here. I can see it. You can see it. Regulators can even see it if they need to. It's a much better way and much lighter way of proceeding rather than, the notion of quarterly or yearly audits, which are not going to catch things quickly enough to avoid potentially very damaging types of issues. So again, a lot of this is forward-looking, right? So I'll just keep going through some additional use cases here. Another one is around journaled model outcomes, right? So the actual predictions, the outcomes of a model, right? So now you can imagine the problem of, let's say I'm an AI as a service provider, right? I provide a model, it makes predictions. That's all my business does. And then there's other applications that build on my predictions downstream to build out, a full solution. All right. So what happens when there's an issue, right? A customer encounters some sort of problem, right? So let's take automotive driving. So let's say I provide a model that can detect objects, right? Do visual processing on objects. And let's say I'm an automotive maker that consumes those models and I build a self-driving, application off of them. Okay, well, what happens when the car goes ahead and hits something it shouldn't hit, right? Very bad situation, very bad outcome. And I want to know exactly where the problem was, right? It can't be a 2-month inquiry about, was this a bug in your model? Was it a bug in my software? We can't get lawyers involved in that. It's going to take too long. You're going to be offline for way too long. What you can do, though, is journal your predictions, right? If I'm an AI as a service provider, I can journal those predictions to a decentralized ledger. I can say, again, I show my work, right? This is what our software did. And if there's any discrepancy about like what actually happened and, what actually happened underneath the hood of this, right? It's not something I have to go and request logs for and get, legal involved, right? We don't want to live in that type of world. And that is still the world we live in today with a lot of our cloud providers, right? So I rely on a cloud provider. I expected to do something. Hey, there was a bug. Hey, it caused me damage. What do? I can't go look through their logs. I can request their logs. I can request a root cause analysis. I can ask for a bunch of stuff. If I'm not satisfied, I can go get, lawyers involved. Slow process, right? And the only reason we've put up with that so long is just the blast radius for these types of things has been easier to mitigate, right? They're much harder to mitigate in the Gen AI world, which is why we think a different approach is necessary. All right. Automation types of use cases. Again, I like to say automate, we're not talking about workflows here, right? Workflows implies people are going to be in the mix, right? We think the vision here is people-less types of automation. So chatbots could be an interesting use case or example of a use case here where we say, if I deploy just a simple customer service, type of chatbot here, there's a whole bunch of issues here. Then how do we figure out, like, when something goes awry with one of these chatbots that we purchased, right? How do we go ahead and trigger some actions based on it that make sense, right? How do we fully automate a recovery? How do we fully sort of streamline this whole process? Another version of it, let's say I release a new version of a chatbot, which maybe I want to do weekly. How do I educate the customer service teams who work alongside these chatbots with changes? It's a very real problem I've had and I've seen, right? You say, hey, we're going to release a feature. I need to inform the customer support team that we have to do our training, we have to do our documentation, we have to make sure they're aware that things are going to change. Okay, but what happens if your changes are now sourced by an LLM? Then what, right? Are you going to slow everything down and say, wait a minute, the actual human beings who do customer support need a couple of days to look through these changes and make sure they understand things? Don't think that's going to work. That's going to be too slow. So what we think though is, well, if automation has to be part of this, right? Every time stuff is changing with with your event stream, with your model development, you're going to need to find a way to automate these events into meaningful actions that help the people who use it be aware of what just changed, right? Without having to go through click a button, review this, right? Touch this. Again, it's another plug for a decentralized ledger, because decentralized ledgers, you can build applications directly on the event stream in a secure, tamper-proof way. All right, so it's a use case, and we think it's an important one. All right, and the last one I'll cover here around sort of forward-looking use cases is they're around model and tokenized data sets, right? So let's briefly just talk about the exchange of data, the tokenization of data, the ownership of data, right? So suppose I want to go ahead and share my information or my proprietary data sets with third parties, right? That makes, again, use cases, I've tried to do this in the past. You get into heavyweight licensing deals. It's difficult, right? It's a very difficult problem to solve. How do you give somebody your data without losing control of it? It's, again, a good use case for a decentralized ledger. You can put something perhaps tokenized on on the ledger that says, this is the cryptographic hash of the data set that we have, and or the rows. Here's the event stream of the data as I change it. So you don't lose ownership of something, even though the data set's continually changing, right? So again, how else would you do this, right? I think that's what keeps coming back to us on Prove AI is we know we're going to need to exchange data. We know we need to change this data continually. How on earth are you going to share this with third parties without it making a mess, right? How are you going to prove that you had ownership of this? How are you going to prove that each of these little change sets is stuff that you initiated, not some other third party, knowing full well that you may be liable for whatever happens down the stream, right? So, again, this is probably one of the most forward-looking use cases out there, but again, starting today, right, our thesis at Prove AI is, all of these things are likely to come back on us and cause a problem in the near future being 1 to 2 years, right? And if they do, then if I'm struggling with compliance today and how should I think about AI, right? We really think that the right way is to, start with your data, start with your event collection, and start thinking about these sort of third-party use cases, these sharing use cases, these types of issues where you need real-time event streams that are outside your multiple MLOps tools, and start there, and then, continue on and build out the reactions to it exactly as you need, right, as an org. So if you're interested, come by. We're at booth 435. Again, we're an early access product. We have a few initial customers, but as you heard from all of these use cases, right, it is early, and that's okay, right? Like any of the past big technology trends, the first step was typically to get your observability, get your eventing, and get your data strategy correct first. You're going to make a headache for yourself later. And all things being equal, if you have to write and store this data anyway, why not choose the right type of storage and the right sort of long-term philosophy here? Because there's really no downside to it, right? There's only potential upside. So with that, I think that's about time, and thank you.
Great. Much. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but we do have a break, so we have a little bit of a buffer. So one common element for a lot of the Gen AI platforms that people may be building for internal use or combining together with, for example, a ChatGPT or a Claude or whatever, is that they all learn from user feedback, right? So essentially the LLM is learning and improving, and the vector databases are adjusting based on the users actually interacting with the data set that's there. Mm-hmm. So obviously one could sort of be retraining the model on new data, but that doesn't necessarily take into account the training that occurs as a result of somebody saying, no, wait, that wasn't actually the best Chinese restaurant on the Upper West Side. Right. You should have also looked at these Chinese restaurants. Well, at that point, the LLM should be learning from the user feedback. So how does one document changes to the overall corpus of information and potential relevance of results when it's coming from user feedback?
Yeah. So that's exactly, that's a great example of the problem here, right? So as the AIs themselves, as the whatever update mechanism in there is, right? We imagine a case where they're writing these events to the decentralized ledgers to basically to tie back who exactly was the actor. Can we cryptographically be sure of who made this change? Another benefit of decentralized ledger, right? And then can you figure out exactly what point in time is? And most importantly, could you replay? Could you basically use a decentralized ledger as like a database ledger? So if there is a problem and then there's a change that somehow, the AIs came to the wrong conclusion here, could you roll back and replay in reverse, right, back to a known good state, right? So yes, you can, and you can do all of these things with something like a decentralized ledger.
Great. Thanks so much. And we'll see you guys back here shortly.
All right. Thank you.